Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you all doing? I hope you're doing really great. I am doing very well, thank you very much, and love to each and every one of you. It's so lovely hearing from you, and it's amazing what people drink. I'm absolutely dumbfounded. One of my listeners drinks dandelion tea, and I actually had to look up what that was. Fascinating. And then somebody else drinks mango Pepsi. I'd never heard of that either, so I'm really being educated. So whatever you drink, let me know. It's fascinating stuff. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, when it comes to buying a property or a piece of land, let me assure you that if the price tag is too good to be true, then it probably is. You need to pay attention because nothing ever comes cheap without a very good reason, and there is usually a catch as to why you're buying it for a song. I was to discover this when at the age of 50 I decided to sell up my sizable farm in West Virginia and downsize to a smaller farm in Kentucky, which would be easier to manage now that my children had long since left home and flown the nest to start families all of their own. When I asked the estate agent why the farm was going so cheap, she was really rather evasive and non-committal, and just informed me that the previous owners wanted a quick sale. My wife sensed immediately that something was up, as she's always been intuitive and doesn't suffer fools gladly. "There's something not right," she said. "Didn't you think the estate agent was rather ambiguous and prevaricating? I sense there's something she's not telling us. Did you not notice how she started brushing us off when we asked her awkward questions about the previous owners? I think she's hiding something nefarious from us. I really do." "Don't be ridiculous, sweetheart," I had said. "The estate agent was just being very brisk, businesslike and efficient. You're just used to people being over-friendly, that's all. She probably didn't want to ramble on, as she has houses to sell and business to conduct." "No," insisted my wife. "That woman was very definitely shifty, and she was indefinite. Why would someone sell up after having recently finished the renovations to their colonial farmhouse and then sell the place for a reasonable price? None of it makes any sense. Don't you think we should go for a drink at a local bar in the town and find out what the locals have to say about the place before we do something stupid like placing an offer on the farm, as irresistible as it may seem to you?" "Very well," I said. "If it's going to make you feel better about buying the place, why not? We haven't got anything to lose after all." Sid Plowman, who ran the local bar in the town, was very friendly towards us, and was a likeable, amiable and jolly kind of character in his early 60s, with a long bushy white beard and a bright orange bandana that he wore over his head. He poured me a large draught of beer, and my wife had a vodka, lime and lemonade, which she sipped very elegantly. "You folk are not from around here, are you?" he said, looking up at us with a bright, friendly smile. "Are you passing through?" "Well, we are not officially," I said. "We are thinking of putting an offer in at the Hickory Homestead Farm. You don't happen to know it by any chance?" "As it happens, I do," said Sid. "An excellent piece of land with some rich, fertile soil that has successfully produced a thriving harvest year after year, not to mention a very mature, established wooded area with some very old trees that have outlived all of us. It's a particularly attractive farm, especially after all those arduous renovations that brought that house up to speed. Not long ago, that colonial house was in an appalling, dilapidated state for many long years and was quite literally neglected and falling apart at the seams. It was tragic, really, but poor Mrs. Spacey and her husband were always in debt, paying off excessive school fees for their children, as they insisted on sending their kids to the best private schools. And let's not kid, that set them back a bob or two, as raising kids ain't cheap, whatever way you look at it. So school uniforms and summer camps certainly took precedence over damage to the house, which took a back seat. Then fortune favoured Mrs. Spacey. She received a sizable inheritance from her father's deceased estate, so she injected a great deal of money into restoring the farmhouse back to its former glory. I do know they were planning to retire there, but I gather from my wife Pam that the house looks like $1 million these days, as it seems that no expense was spared, ensuring that the house's historic integrity was very definitely preserved. That is very true, I said. That's one of the reasons we are eager to buy the place, because it doesn't require any work at all. But you don't happen to know why it's going on the market so cheap, do you? It seems a ridiculously low price for such a desirable home. You mean you don't know? Asked Sid, raising a quizzical eyebrow. The estate agent didn't tell you about the house? Tell us what? Asked my wife, growing concerned. Well, I don't know quite how to say this to you, but the house seems to be haunted, said Sid, looking awkward. It seems to have been on the market for 3 long years, without a single buyer as a result. People here are very superstitious, you know, wary about purchasing a haunted home. It would seem that the renovations seem to have sparked and activated some paranormal activity. I don't believe in hocus pocus, I piped. It's nonsensical, all that stuff. I must confess I didn't believe in it at all, said Sid, until many of the builders working at that site complained that their tools would go missing, only to turn up later in rather peculiar places, and they said that something would occasionally tap them on the back when no one appeared to be there. And one man kept swearing that he could hear a woman's voice saying, "Help me, please, help me," and he said it freaked him out. I gather he refused to return to the job after that. Is that it? I said. I hardly see that as a good reason for selling her land so speedily. I mean, someone asking for help and some tools going missing for a while, I hardly see as a very big deal, and I'm sure there's a rational, practical explanation for these anomalies, as there usually is an explanation in some way. Well, there's more to it than that, but I'm afraid Mrs. Spacey was never ever forthcoming about it all. She was reticent by nature at the best of times, and so getting anything out of her was like extracting blood out of a stone. However, she did claim that something had pushed her down the staircase once with a brute, savage force, and that for her was the final straw, which was why the Spaceys put the place up for sale. After those astounding revelations from Sid, I cannot say that I lost any enthusiasm for buying the property, as all the gossip was hearsay as far as I was concerned. I also do happen to know, from having grown up in a small rural town myself, that rumours that circulate have a habit or propensity for becoming highly exaggerated. I remember once, for example, hearing that Mr. Brown, a man that lived in our small town, had been attacked by a vicious, savage cat, and by the time the story had reached our home, we were informed that this cat was a dangerous mountain lion that had scratched him to within an inch of his life, and it was a miracle that he was still alive. Upon seeing Mr. Brown, my mother had said to him, "Oh, I heard about your dreadful attack, Mr. Brown, and how badly beaten up and scratched you were by that dangerous, horrible cat. I'm so relieved you're all right." At that, Mr. Brown promptly responded, "Good grief, woman! The way you and all the townsfolk are talking, you would think I was attacked and mauled by a mountain lion. It was only my domestic tabby that scratched me, and vicious and mischievous he may be, but dangerous he most certainly is not. Why are all the townsfolk around here making such a monumental big deal about my cat scratching me? People have been sending me flowers, chocolates, and get-well-soon cards. Honestly, what's wrong with the folk around there?" At that, my mother was very appalled at how a disagreeable domestic cat had somehow managed to morph into a ferocious mountain lion, But that is the nature of gossip for you, that does have the remarkable predisposition of inflating everything, so that a small little party balloon blows up into a hot air balloon. There is quite a difference. Going back to the buying of the house, after much persuasion, my wife finally allowed me to buy the place on the strict condition that we had the place blessed by a priest, and she also saged the whole house in order to remove any negative energy. Before long, we settled into our beguiling colonial farmhouse, and we soon began to realise that all the rumours about the house were just that, rumours and idle speculation, for we never had any trouble from outer worldly sources, so to speak. Well, not in the beginning, that is. My greatest source of contention about my idyllic farmland was a growing monumental hog problem, as after sowing my seed, those annoying, irritating creatures would waste no time in sloughing up the land with about as much efficiency as a bulldozer, which meant I was forced to reseed it a couple of times and call out for government resources to begin trapping the tiresome buggers. But unfortunately, from what I learnt, they never cover the costs of the replaced seed. One day when I ventured into the statuesque woods on my land that were full of ancient oak trees, hickories and pines, and were so tall and imposing that I marvelled that they'd never been cut down, as they towered in the sky like sizable skyscrapers with magnificent vertical trunks, and they formed a perfect canopy above my head, allowing shafts of sunlight to dapple the floor in a resplendent subtle light. As I walked through the spectacular woodland, the enchanting, sharp, sweet, refreshing, minty smell of pine permeated through the air and reminded me of Christmas. I sensed something was different about the woods on this occasion, and the only way I can describe it to you is that I felt that I was definitely not alone, and that there was a very powerful presence in the vicinity, such of the likes that I have never ever experienced before. It was an intricate sense of knowing that I was standing close to a forceful apex predator, much like a lion, rhino or elephant, something very sizable and powerful that demanded my attention and respect. All of a sudden, a very large, healthy tree confirmed my very worst fears, as it came tumbling down with effortless ease, landing only yards away from where I was standing. I was so astounded, because a healthy tree does not mysteriously uproot itself out of the ground like this for no apparent reason, and there was no wind on this sunny spring day. I knew that something was hiding in plain sight, and whoever they were, I knew that they had performed this clever stunt to get my undivided attention. Who was it that was strong enough to push over a tree like this? I couldn't imagine. I just stood there gobsmacked and nonplussed by this extraordinary event, trying to make sense of it. Then quite suddenly another tree came tumbling down, again only yards away from me. Was I alarmed, and was I perplexed? Of course I was, but I was also intrigued and mystified as to who or what could be capable of this impressive manoeuvre. I refused to be intimidated by this strange, unorthodox phenomena, and stood my ground instead of running away, which I'm certain most people in my position would wisely have done, but that was not me. I've always had nerves of steel, and not easily been intimidated or disheartened, and in a strange way I sensed that I was being tested by something or someone, and come hell or high water, I was going to pass their duplicitous test. Seconds later, a large stone came flying in my direction, once again narrowly missing me by inches, but I just knew that whoever was throwing this rock at me knew exactly what they were doing. If they really wanted to harm me, they could have done so already, as they knew how to aim with an accurate precision. That was very apparent to me. So I firmly stood my ground, simply refusing to budge. In seconds, a couple more large rocks came flying towards me, and they were incredibly close, too close for comfort. They could have potentially knocked me out in a single blow, but they did not, so I remained steadfastly still. All of a sudden I heard a piercing, loud whistle that was so shrill, and too shrill to be of human origin, and it certainly was no bird. In a trice I saw what I perceived to be part of a tree trunk. Only it wasn't, because it differentiated itself from the tree and disproportioned itself, rather like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon and separating itself from the silk, making its distinction very clear. Once he had distanced himself from the tree as a different entity, that was when I observed him. He made his presence known to me, for without doubt he had chosen to show himself to me. It was not an accident that I was seeing him. I knew I'd passed his test because the creature looked rather impressed. He regarded me through his wise, very intelligent brown eyes. I sensed he was studying me curiously, as if reading my very thoughts. The creature was very large, imposing and sinewy, and was easily over 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, and 3 feet wide across the shoulders that were gargantuan in size. He looked exactly like a very strong, powerful, athletic human being, only much wider and much taller, covered in long, flowing brown hair. Only his muscular arms were particularly long, travelling below his knees, and his head was an unusual pyramid shape, while his weathered face was uncannily human in appearance, with dark tan-coloured leathery skin, a long beard, a sloped wrinkled forehead, a flat squashed-looking nose, with deep-set toffee-coloured eyes. This extraordinary creature then turned around and glided into the heart of the woods, and he moved on his powerful, very strong legs, with such agility and grace, as though he was floating. How can something that size move with such elegance and poise? It was absolutely mind-blowing. I remember thinking, what the heck was that? I didn't feel concerned or fearful, but just so overwhelmed with a sense of wondrous awe, as I'd never seen something so fantastical and incongruous with our reality, something that made me question everything I thought I knew. I discerned few people have ever seen a creature like this at such close range. For me personally, it was an incredible, provocative experience, like encountering a woolly mammoth or even a dinosaur, as that was how prodigious, portentous, and phenomenal this creature was, in my humble opinion. Later that afternoon, the trapper arrived in his white van to set up all his traps to help manage our hog population. But no sooner had he arrived on the scene than he bolted out of the wood green with a terrified, discomposed face that was drained of all its colour. He was saying that something had been throwing rocks at him and had been stalking him stealthily through the woods like a prowling predator watching his every move. Whatever it was, he said, it was monstrously huge, because I could hear it breathing, and it sounded like a horse, and I could feel its predatory eyes on me, he exclaimed. But I couldn't see it, and I don't want to either, thank you very much, as the less I know about what is loitering in your woods, the better as far as I'm concerned. He promptly informed us that he would send someone else to set up the traps, but as I expected, they never arrived. I was feeling very aggrieved about this monumental setback, because how was I going to grow any crops with an out-of-control hog problem on my hands that I could not manage on my own? These hogs successfully were sabotaging all my hard work. The next day I tried to take matters into my own hands by stealthily trying to creep up on some wary hogs with rifle in hand, but at the best of times I've never been skilled at hunting, as I lack the quintessential patience, skill and coordination clearly needed for an efficient kill. I could see the creatures were rooting around in the soil, causing an extensive amount of damage, but they smelt me before they even saw me, and immediately trotted away at one hell of a speed. I began to scream in frustration, placing my hands over my ears and feeling so infuriated and overwhelmed. Oh! Oh! All of a sudden, the body of a dead hog came flying in my direction like a ball suspended about 10 feet in the air, and it came thundering to the ground with an almighty crash after bouncing for a moment. I was astounded to see that a sizable 700-pound hog had been wilfully thrown into the air, as if it was light as a feather, when the reverse was actually true. I know of no man with the capability of performing such an outlandish manoeuvre that requires incredible strength. On close inspection of the hog, I discerned that it had been killed by 2 breaks to the neck. Over a couple of hours, several hogs were now lying dead on the edges of my pasture, all killed with exactly the same protocol. Over the next couple of days, many more were culled, of which I was incredibly grateful, but that was not through the help of government authorities who had failed to be of much assistance to me. Instead, I knew I owed a debt of gratitude to this intelligent, discerning, idiosyncratic creature that I had observed in the woodgreen. I believe it had generously assisted me in keeping the hog population under control, and had discerned that I was having huge issues with these creatures. At last I was able to sow the seed on my land without any issues. When I told my wife about what had happened, she was determined that we should leave a large basket of fruit out for the creature by way of a thank you, which was what we did. And in turn he rewarded us with a dead deer on our doorstep the following morning that had been killed by 2 breaks to the neck. So my wife filled up our freezer with venison. One day my wife told me that she was having peculiar, very lucid dreams, which was exceedingly uncommon for her, as she never usually remembers any of her dreams. I see this young African-American girl. She's standing at the end of my bed. She keeps asking me for help because she needs to go home to see her baby. I can see her face very clearly, and she looks discomposed and distraught, and I ask her why she can't go home, and then she points to this horrible oafish-looking man with mean, dark, piercing eyes and a scar around his cheek, who keeps running to the door and blocking her path. I can sense that she's trapped, and she begins to cry, and when she cries there's a puddle of water near the front door from all her tears. This was an extraordinary revelation on my wife's part, because we both knew that we'd been calling the plumber around to the house on several occasions because we were always finding large puddles of water near the front door. The plumber was exceedingly perplexed by this mysterious water and told us that there were no leaks anywhere in the roof, and nothing that could account for this mysterious water, but he said the water tasted salty, which was an even greater enigma for us. So my wife's peculiar dream certainly gave us pause for thought and reflection. I think I'm going to call over a psychic medium to the house, she said. I believe my lucid dreams are somehow connected to this place, and in some way I want to help set that poor African-American girl free if I can. I do feel strongly that she is tied to this place in some way. We contacted a highly credited psychic medium who agreed to visit our home on the Friday night. But it was strange how our house that had been devoid of paranormal activity up till now, well, so we thought, suddenly became a very different place. The only way I can actually describe it to you is that a very heavy, menacing and rather sinister presence became very tangible to us, and you could physically sense that someone was there in the room with you, only you couldn't see anything. During the night my wife had woken up screaming, insisting that she had seen a man's scowling face leering at her with very mean, dark, sinister eyes. But his body, she told me, seemed almost abstract, and then he just vanished before her eyes. The way he looked at me made my skin crawl. He was hideous, and I could feel his rage that seemed directed at me. It was like he wanted to kill me. I knew my wife was not predisposed to making up stories, and so I believed her. Imagine our surprise the very next morning when I went down to breakfast to discover that all our kitchen cabinets were wide open, and several dozen plates were lying on the ground, completely smashed to smithereens. "Who did this?" said my wife, looking appalled. As we were pondering this bizarre situation and cleaning up all the damage, the bell to our front door rang, and it was the psychic who was planning to visit us on the Friday evening, but had arrived 2 days earlier, and by the aggrieved expression upon her face, something was irking her considerably. "My name's Laura," she said, shaking my hand cordially. She was a nice, attractive-looking young woman with a warm smile, flawless fair skin, and brown bob chestnut hair with golden highlights, and very intense dark brown eyes. "I'm sorry to arrive here unannounced," she said, "but I sense that you are both in very grave danger. There is a dark force in this house that is trying to harm you both. I couldn't get to sleep last night, as I had dreadful visions of your wife being thrown down the stairs by this vindictive man whose intention is to break both your necks. This malevolent entity will stop at nothing to try and kill the both of you," she said, looking at us both gravely. He'd like to gather your souls among those he has already imprisoned here. Even in my car on the way to your farmhouse, my brand new tyre was punctured deliberately in order to stop me from cleansing this house of yours and forcing him out of this place. Believe me, he does not want to leave. But why would he want to harm us? Asked my wife. Can I sit down for a moment so that I can tell you exactly what's going on? Said Laura. And so it was, over a hot cup of tea, Laura began to tell us the incredible story. She presented us with pictures she had drawn of the entities in our home. My wife nearly fell backwards on her chair when she saw a picture of an African-American girl that she recognised. That's the girl I saw in my lucid dream, she exclaimed to me. Who is she? Her name is Yolanda, and she was a slave in this house in 1810. And unfortunately the landowner, Mr. Cudmore, was having a secret relationship with her. And when he discovered she was pregnant, he killed her. He didn't want his wife to know about his adulterous affair. He has trapped her soul in this house, along with many other souls, including that of his own wife, and he is refusing to let them go to the light or cross over to the other side. But why would he do such a dreadful thing? Asked my wife, appalled. Because he's afraid of judgment, and also he seems to enjoy being a bully. I'm inclined to believe the latter is more the case. This is a picture of Mr. Cudmore that I've drawn, she said, handing the picture to my wife. My wife gasped in astonishment. That's the face of the horrifying man I saw standing at the end of my bed last night. He looked furious. See, I told you, he had a nasty skull, she said, pointing to the picture. He wasn't an attractive man, and I could feel his rage. He's mad at you, because he knows he's about to be evicted, said Laura. And believe it or not, although Mr. Cudmore is a dangerous spirit, he will not be difficult to turf out, because he's not a demonic entity. He's a disagreeable, insidious, unsavoury character, and there is a big difference. So how are we going to free the trapped souls? I asked. Well, we're going to throw holy water throughout the house, and Pastor Lee Wotton is going to bless the entire place and command Mr. Cudmore to leave, and then we'll free the other spirits by the use of candles, prayers and meditation. All of a sudden, a glass vase on our coffee table lifted itself in the air and turned sideways and was flung violently in Laura's direction, landing only yards away from her and smashing on the floor, breaking into hundreds of sharp shards, and the pretty peony's petals were scattered on the ground liberally, rather like delicate confetti. Despite the violent demonstration from the cantankerous, fractious spirit of Mr. Cudmore, Laura appeared unfazed, as she had seen it all before, and she knew that the petulant, crabby, captious man was letting off steam. He knows the clock is ticking, she told us, and that he'll be leaving soon, so he's trying to ruffle our feathers by scaring us. It's important for us to remain grounded and calm, because spirits like Mr. Cudmore feed off fear, so don't oblige him by being at all anxious. Pastor Lee Wotton arrived on the scene with his Bible, crucifix and bottle of holy water. He was a short, stout man with round spectacles and a bald, shiny head, framed by a round lion of scant hair. It would seem that from the moment he entered the house, he sensed the disagreeable and truculent spirit of Mr. Cudmore, and wasted no time in commanding him to leave at once. And as Laura had rightly predicted, the spirit didn't put up much of a fight, and suddenly we all witnessed this mysterious, dark, hazy smoke leaving the roof in a long, vertical line. Several minutes later, after everybody was holding hands and creating a ball of light in our minds, my wife and I physically saw these light orbs just lifting through the ceiling and disappearing from our sight. It was remarkable to observe. They've all gone now, said Laura, and the trapped spirits are now free. Is that not wonderful? She said. For the first time since we moved into our home, we could sense a lightness to the place, almost as if the sunshine permeated and enveloped every room, and it had never felt this inviting and welcoming before. Another thing, said Laura, I'm being told you have a problem with hogs running amok over your land. Is that right? I was astonished. How do you know about this? I asked. Your friend out there in the woods has just told me that. You're a lucky man. It would seem he has your back. He's telling me he likes you very much indeed. Who is she talking about? My wife asked me, looking perturbed. Well, remember the hairy creature that killed the hogs for us, I said. I think that's who Laura is referring to. Your friend is saying you're wanting to get some cows. Is that right? Asked Laura. That's right, I said. But not even my wife knows about this thought of mine. I don't understand how he could possibly know about this. Your friend in the woods is called Falcon, and he knows quite a lot about you. I would say he's telepathic. He tells me it's very easy to read your mind because you don't hide your thoughts. He likes that about you. He says he's looking out for you and will help keep your hog population down and keep a watch over your cows when you get them. He says he respects you because you have a good heart, and he wants to thank your wife for the fruit, with the exception of the bananas. He doesn't like them at all. He says they taste like some beetle that he can't stand. Tell him he's welcome, I said. Tell him yourself, said Laura. Remember, he reads your thoughts. That event happened over 20 years ago. It is scary how time flies. I'm now a 70-year-old man living on my farm, and I feel like I'm still 50. And to date, I've never had any problems with excessive hogs on my land. And the moment I introduced my cows to the pastures, I've never had any issues with them either. On one occasion, when one of my cows was down, I came outdoors to find her propped up with barrels of hay, which kept her stable, because lying flat on her sides can cause bloat and is fatal. I knew at once that my cow's life had been saved by Falcon. How had he known what to do? That is what was astonishing to me. On another occasion, one of my cows was struggling to give birth to her calf as it had been breached, and I couldn't waste any time, so I hastily ran to the barn to get a chain to tie its legs. But when I returned, the baby calf had been successfully and safely born, and in the mud was a telltale 18-inch footprint, and I knew that Falcon had come to my assistance because that footprint could not have belonged to anybody else. Over the years, he's helped us on multiple occasions and even rescued a calf when it got trapped in a ditch, and its mother was so distressed that she ran up to the farmhouse to get my attention. I could see the dark, shadowy silhouette of Falcon retrieving my calf from the ditch. He lifted it up in his arms, like you and I would lift up a domestic cat. I sometimes refer to him as my invisible farmhand, who has offered me invaluable assistance over the years. I gather from a fellow I know from the Forestry Commission that the trees Falcon brought down have helped to thin the forest down, and he has removed trees that have been damaged also by fungus. We do get brief sightings of Falcon on our farm when he gives us a nod and just glides away. Over the years, my wife and I have left him parcels of food, which he always appreciates, but we find he dislikes bananas immensely because he always sends them back, which is hilariously funny. I now know that Falcon is a Bigfoot, and he is my best-kept secret, and to this day I've never told anyone about him, until now, in this anonymous forum. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, I think we could all do with a Bigfoot on our land like Falcon, managing our pig population. Until next time, goodbye and good night, and don't forget to subscribe if you like the story.